Greetings, friends, and welcome back to the Musings from the Mount podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Carenza. In the following two episodes, Michael Lindfield and I explore white and black magic through the lens of the Alice Bailey Agni Yoga traditions. We are examining the distinctions between white and black magic, not as supernatural phenomenon, but as approaches to creative energy where intention determines everything. We discuss how this understanding relates to both personal growth and global challenges, and we pose the question, are we working with the soul of things or merely the material aspects? So join us as we investigate what it means to be a conscious co-creators aligned with evolution rather than involution, and hear how the heart serves as the new operating system for true magical work. And we hope you enjoy the episode. If you do enjoy this podcast, please consider going to meditationmount.org and donating. Your donation helps us to bring you this podcast as well as all the other programs the Mount produces, both today and in the future. We're incredibly grateful and honored by your support. And now, back to part one of White and Black Magic. Anytime you head down the esoteric path of study and immersion, you eventually come upon the subject of magic. And I just want to recognize for the record that, it's exciting. You bump up against this in very different forms in all the different schools, and today we wanted to talk about section 107, to ponder on this, white and black magic. And when you hear that, it summons all kinds of various things, everything from, 1960s rock and roll covers to, bearded guys with robes and pointed hats but when you start to study, especially in the Alice Bailey tradition, the tranquility, it comes down to something quite simple, doesn't it?
It really does. And what you're talking about is these are the archetypes that show up in all the mythologies, all the fairy stories.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they're with us everywhere. And sometimes they get out of proportion and they become this huge, huge drama. We'll be exploring using the Ponder on this book, which is the compilation of the Alice Bailey writings, which is the wisdom from the Master DK, the Tibetan. And as you say, we're going to look at magic, black and white, as it says. I just want to say that when you think of magic, you think of something supernatural.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But what we're really talking about is something that is natural, which we've used the axiom, energy follows thought. So what we are doing as a magician or what we are doing as a creator, because they're the same thing, we are formulating thoughts which have a geometry to them. They have a symmetry to them. And when we energize them, they reach a point of precipitation and they take shape. The question is, from where are you drawing the forces that you're giving shape to? Are they the forces of materialism and the elemental world, or are they the higher forces of light that are seeking to lift matter into its true light? Because remember, we've said this before, occultly, matter is called black light. Because inside the heart of every atom, inside every atom of substance, there is a light waiting to be revealed. And yet, black and white really goes back to this eternal struggle between good and evil. We're going to get into this as we read this, but I think it's good to remember this is the struggle that's going on inside of us all the time. It's the pull of the matter. It's the pull of our emotional addictions. It's the pull of our mental beliefs. And then the counter attraction of the soul to uplift, to allow us to relinquish. We did a 2-part series on relinquishing. And you relinquish so that the full flow of life can happen through you. Mm-hmm. So I believe I'd like to go through this and see how it plays out in the world today, because it's easy to demonize people or nations at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But what you can notice is what people and what nations on the world stage are actually embodying a certain level of consciousness. Where do they draw their power from? Is it from the power of matter and the elemental forces? Or is it from the higher solar regions, which we call the soul? So I just say that to preface our journey, because this is a subject that sometimes people tiptoe around, and it's a delicate one, because, yeah, who's to say what is what? Well, what I'd like to do, rather than Michael and Joey saying what we think is to use the words of the Master DK, who's done a lot of pondering on this one, and then we can add our own anecdotes and maybe pose the questions that our listeners can pose themselves. So do you have anything else before we dive into, as you say, section 107, Magic, White, and Black?
Yeah, I think for me, because this was always a subject for me that I was always pursuing. It started when I was in my early 20s, and I was on tour with bands, and every city I would go to, people might not know what this is now, but they used to have these used bookstores. And I would go and find the esoteric books, and I'd try to read them, and it was just like reading Greek. I mean, I could read the words, but I had no context. I had no way to sort of a place to put this, but I was fascinated by them, and I did this. I've done this my entire life, and until recently, it really kind of came together with in the way that in the Alice Bailey books, it ties it to your physical body, and it's like, your body is like the hardware, and the magic is the software. And I try to think of it like, I think back to the first iPhone and how cool it was, but and it was an amazing thing, but none of the apps that we use every day, even the simplest apps I use today, would have run on that hardware.
True, and this So the hardware we're using now is not the mind; it's the heart.
Okay, yeah.
See, this is the shift.
Right.
I was thinking at some point I'd like to talk about the old forms of magic, where there were schools where you were trained, the Order of the Golden Dawn.
Right.
You got Aleister Crowley and his stuff, but then that got a little twisted and tainted because he introduced some earthbound stuff into it, and it got a little...
It got wobbly.
It got wobbly and entangled. And his house and where he lived and where he practiced was not far from the Findhorn Foundation. So I've been up to that area, and I know the whole area is steeped in that. So there's the tradition of you're trained as a magician and you're given formulas, you know how to invoke and call in certain presences and how to protect yourself. That's the old operating system. The new operating system is the heart. And the heart is on call to life. And all you're doing is you're responding to life as a co-creative agent. It may not be as glamorous as wearing fancy robes and a pointed hat. But it's the same thing, Joey.
And we're going to go through it, but that really came through for me, how it is a completely different paradigm. It's like, it really is. It's not, it's this resonant note that you're sort of, like the bass player plays a note and you're riffing off of it, So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So maybe we can do what we normally do. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, these quotations that we're using that are collected together and ponder on this were written 60, 70 plus years ago, and they use the masculine pronoun. They use a way of expressing that maybe is not the way we do things now. Rather than changing everything in mid-flow, we're going to go with the original text and assume that when it says man, it means person, or when it says mankind, it means humanity. And then we'll use the power of these words to call forth a new understanding in us. Because that's the other thing, Joey. We're going to go through a book that has already written in it certain understandings of the truth. You and I know that when you dedicate a field like this podcast, if we say that this podcast is a field in which new insights can happen, because of the power of our intent, all of those listening, you and I and all of those listening can actually be open in the moment to new ahas. And I want that to be, so it isn't just going over what's already been written. This is a living space. Even though this is a recording you're listening to, it's a living space. So it says, we're starting out now. Much is said amongst occult students these days, anent, which he means about, and DK uses the word anent a lot.
I was wondering if that was a typo or if it was...
No, anent, it means about.
Right.
And I have a friend who was absolutely, would sort of gag on this.
Yeah.
But it says, much is said amongst occult students these days, anent white and black magic, and much that is said is without force or truth. It has been truly said that between the two types of workers, the line of demarcation is so slight as to be difficult of recognition by those who, as yet, merit not the term of quote-unquote knower.
Mm-hmm. I right off the bat, I was floored by that. The distinction between, because so we're talking about black and white magic, and then it turns out it's not so black and white. It's just this thin line.
My understanding of this, and it's based on what DK's written in other parts of his books, is that the first three stages are the development of your own power.
Okay.
And the unleashing and the contacting of your own power.
Mm-hmm.
Then there comes the classic fork in the road.
Yeah.
And we're not going to quote Yogi Berra, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. This fork in the road is between the left-hand path and the right-hand path.
Mm.
But the first few steps on the path, it's difficult to discern if it's white or black. It only becomes white or black when you commit yourself and agree to follow a certain focus, either selfish and using the forces of materialism, as we'll find out, or whether you're here to serve the good of the whole. So that there is a fork in the road.
Yeah.
But the first few stages, you're just getting in touch with the power of life that is inherent in everyone. It's how you wield that power.
Yeah.
And for what end? That's what's going to differentiate between the white and the black worker. So the distinction between the two exists in both motive and method, and might be summed up as follows. So he's going to give us, the summary. The white magician has for motive that which will be of benefit to the group for whom he is expanding his energy and time. The magician of the left-hand path ever works alone, or if he at any time cooperates with others, it is with a hidden, selfish purpose. The exponent of white magic interests himself in the work of constructive endeavor in order to cooperate in hierarchical plans. This is the divine plan. This is carrying out the destiny of the planet, and to further the desires of the planetary logos, which is the fulfilling of planetary purpose. The brother of darkness occupies himself with that which lies outside of the divine plan, and with that which is not included in the purpose of the Lord of the planetary ray. Basically saying his actions are not in support of the purpose of the system in which he's currently living.
Yeah.
So then it goes on to say, the white magician, as has been earlier said, works entirely through the greater deva builders. These are the higher angelic forces. And through sound and numbers, he blends their work and thus influences the lesser builders who form the substance of their bodies and therefore of all that is. So this is a long paragraph, so I'd like to stop there and just make this distinction. We talk about the elemental forces. These are the forces of nature that are primarily of matter, and they're there to provide the clothing and the substance for our thoughts. So that's the building material. Now, the design, you don't ask the building material substance to come up with the overall design. The overall design is from the what they call the greater builders, the angelic forces. So you've got the angelic forces, which work with, if you like, the higher dimensions of the planet. These are the solar angels. And they carry, if you like, the spiritual architecture. They know what needs to be worked out. And then they, like a good contractor, subcontract the elemental forces. So when you're working as a white magician, you work with the greater builders who then employ the lesser builders. It's called greater and lesser, not because it's, one's more important. It's a frequency thing. So the greater builders are called the devas.
Yeah.
And the elementals are called the lesser builders because they're the subcontractors. So the white magician always works with the level of divine architecture, which is really in accord with the design of the purpose. It's the outworking of purpose through design, as it says here. The Deva builders, they work through sound and numbers, and the magician blends their work. So this is where it's not so much you have to have an understanding of all these different formulas, of magical formulas, but when you work through the heart, you're working primarily with love and the light of the soul, and therefore you can cooperate. I've mentioned this before. R. Ogilvy Crombie, Rock, who was at Findhorn, the community in the north of Scotland, when I was there in the early 70s, he was a trained magician. He was trained in the Order of the Golden Dawn, same as Aleister Crowley. And he understood the formulas. He understood the geometry, the inner geometry. What I'm saying now is that we don't have to know that to that same degree of specificity when we work through the new operating system, the heart, because the heart automatically translates the impulse of purpose into, it codifies it.
Yeah.
It can code it directly, Joey.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's my take on it. It's not in the books, but that's my take on it. So let's go on, and then we'll find out. I'd love to hear what your impressions are on this. So it goes back to the white magician. He works through group centers and vital points of energy, and from thence produces in substance the desired result. So you work with the higher, and the higher then call upon, if you like, the workers, the elemental workers, to clothe and to formulate, to bring into form the higher desire. That's the work of the white magician. And we've said before, in the old tradition of magic, you cooperate with the angels or the devas, but you command the elementals. You don't ask an element, what do you think we should be doing? Because it's going to say, back to matter, back to matter. It is not part of a natural evolution. It's not wired for the evolutionary flow, but it is part of the evolutionary flow that is lifted by the angelic. I don't want to get too technical here, but okay, now it says, the dark brother works directly with substance itself and with the lesser builders. He does not cooperate with the forces which emanate from egoic levels. These are the higher levels of the higher self. So here's this another differentiation. A black magician does not work with the higher forces. Goes straight to where the power is in matter.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that distinction fascinating.
Yeah. The white magician works always in cooperation with others and is himself under the direction of certain group heads. That means we're not working alone. We are working in cooperation with greater lives because, if you like, the destiny of the solar system is to produce a constellation of suns, the planets to become enlightened. So there is the fulfilling of a destiny that's held by a greater being as a co-creative agent, which is really the solar system as a magician, or the solar lord as a magician. So we're always working in concordance with greater dimensions of this because we are the agents in this great chain of blessing or this great chain of manifestation. And therefore, we get our impressions from those that hold a wiser view. And then we put into practice and we gather the substance to formulate it by contracting with the lesser builders. And I hope this doesn't become too technical for people. We're not trying to overwhelm you with technicalities or confuse. It's just that there's a basic distinction, and this is what we're finding out here. The white magician works with the, if you like, the forces of creation at the highest level. And the black magician simply uses the power of matter to carry out their own ends.
Yeah.
Okay. So, moving right along. The black magician usually works in an intensely individualistic way and can be seen carrying out his schemes alone or with the aids of subordinates. He brooks usually no known superior, but is nevertheless frequently the victim of agents on higher levels of cosmic evil. Whoa, now there's
That's a heavy sentence.
who use him as he uses his inferior cooperators. That is, he works, as far as the bigger purpose involved, blindly and unconsciously. This is a really tricky one because it's, in my life, in your life, if I do something, like if I'm angry and if I send out a hateful thought to somebody, that hateful thought opens up a door of resonance and allows the embodiment or the presence of hatred to enter me that is more than me, because that still is alive. And we know from the Great Invocation, which is one of the prayers that the Tibetan put out, it says, may the plan of love and light, work out and seal the door where evil dwells. So sealing the door where evil dwells is making sure that we don't open it inadvertently by doing things that call in the very thing we don't want inside of us.
Yeah.
Because it's all based on resonance.
Right.
Energy follows thought is the crystallization of a resonant relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, I like how that ties together. That's
the white magician. We're proceeding with the commentary here. The white magician, as is well known, works on the side of evolution or in connection with the path of return. Remember that the path of descent was when spirit needed to enter matter. That's what involution is. It's helping spirit have enough ballast, have enough weight, like a diver going to the bottom of the ocean, to get into matter, to materialize. And then on the path of return is twofold. One is harvesting the lessons we've learned by being in the classroom of time, space, and substance. The other is to actually raise the frequency of matter itself. The black brother occupies himself with the forces of involution or with the path of outgoing. The outgoing was the descent of spirit into matter. They form the great balancing force in evolution, as though they are occupied with the material side of manifestation, and the brother of light is concerned with the aspect of the soul or consciousness. They and their work under the great law of evolution contribute to the general purpose of the solar logos, which is the being that ensouls the sun. Though, and then it says in parenthesis, and this is of tremendous occult significance to the illuminated student, not, in italics, not to the individual purpose of the planetary logos. So it's say, well, what may be the right thing to do at the solar level may rub the planetary life up the wrong way.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting.
And who knows? We don't.
Yeah.
I've got to take this on faith, and faith is the,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think it's some like the part where the a black musician is sometimes being used by something higher, not even knowing it. It's like being a pawn and not knowing you're a pawn. Sometimes the decisions from headquarters, not necessarily the best for the people in the field,
Well, we touched on it when we were doing relinquishing, and also when we were doing on service, is that you can inadvertently, because of being misguided or being self-centered, inadvertently be what DK calls a servant of darkness. Doesn't mean you're an evil person. It means that act actually on the ledger, you've just contributed to that side of the ledger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's fascinating. And you see true that, like, he is writing kind of here also about this balance. It requires both sides, it seems like,
But the both sides is like there's night and day.
Yeah.
There's dark and light.
Mm-hmm.
But those are natural. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so when I go to sleep at night, it's the time for rest and to go back into the darkness.
Yeah.
It's not a place where I'm destroyed or terrified.
Yeah.
It's unnatural. But what we've done, we've used the darkness to fill it with those things which hold back the evolution of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, we appropriate the different conditions for selfish ends. Think of it this way. As I said, when spirit needed to enter time, space, and substance, it needed involution to involve itself. Mm-hmm. Involution is the involvement of life in matter.
Okay.
Now we're evolving.
Right.
We're returning. It isn't like we're getting the heck out of Dodge and we can't wait to get back to spirit because, Dodge City's so bad.
Right.
We are actually redeeming.
Okay.
So you're a redeemer, you're a co-creator, you're a magician. And on the path of return, life is lifted and we are lifted.
Mm.
So if you think of it this way, that involution is the densification of spirit, the encasing of spirit in forms so that it can experience. Mm. Because I, as a human, can't go to the bottom of the ocean. I need to go into a submersible, right, or a diving suit that can stand up to that atmosphere or that.
Yeah, the pressure.
The pressure. And the return path of evolution is when we are refining and we are raising and releasing the encasing of consciousness, which is the material forms. Because form is temporary, spirit is eternal, as we said before. And as a gardener, I'm thinking that seeds have to be sown deep in the darkness of earth. Mm. That's because the darkness is not evil. The darkness is not death. We said this many times. The darkness of the soil is the womb, not the tomb. Yeah. And then the seeds, they don't know where they're going. But when they're planted in the soil, something automatically triggers when they're germinated. The life force calls them to the light. They move upwards. They break the surface. And then they start to grow their stems and their flowers and to unfold. Now, that's the force of evolution. Using that image, the forces of materialism or the dark forces at the moment want to take that growing flower and bury it back in the soil. Okay. And not have it reveal itself. Because the whole point of the earth is the revelation of the light of truth, of love, of goodness and beauty that lives inside the heart of every atom. Mm-hmm. Now, if you say, no, I don't want that, why don't you want that? Well, because if I keep everything in prison, I can actually use the energy like a vampire.
Yeah, yeah. I see that. Yeah.
And the thing is, unbeknownst to the dark worker at that time, they're being used.
Yeah, I see it as like this sort of nesting dolls of parasites, one on top of another,
It's not turtles all the way down. This is parasites all the way down.
Mosquito after mosquito.
Yeah. That's a great one. And then we talk about the left-hand and right-hand path. Now, those of you who are left-handed, please don't think that you're doomed to be on the left-hand path. Because we talk about how do you characterize darkness? Well, it's sinister. Well, where does the word sinister come from? It's Latin. Sinistere, the left-hand path, because traditionally, through cultures, the left-hand path has always been unlucky. It wasn't the path of fortune.
Oh, right. Okay.
So the left and right is not a polarization in that way. It just means, yeah, it's not. And fortune is the movement into greater possibilities, because then you're more fortunate.
Mhm.
And you can only move into greater possibilities when you evolve into the light.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe this is a good time to stop and take a break and humanize all of this. Joey, what do you make of this so far?
Oh, well, I think it's interesting just how simple, again, and these concepts that are often simple, but not easy, like, so it's simple. Are you creating? Are you working as a group? Or are you working with, sort of selfish, self-focused energy? And it just it's amazing how that translates to everything, like and also why group endeavor is like sort of the ultimate form of work, but also the most difficult. You know, there's that one saying: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah.
And it seems like one of those throwaway lines until you've had to lead groups or be parts of groups, and there's that temptation to just want, I know the way to do this. Let's just let me do it, and then I can speed us through this thing. And then you realize, that's not going to work. Not in this new paradigm.
Or if there is a need to aggrandize oneself,
Mm-hmm.
how do you aggrandize oneself? Well, you get power and you inflate yourself. You're not expanding yourself by going into the regions of the soul, which are more expansive.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're blowing yourself up like a balloon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your material side. And it's interesting that it says, finally, this is what he said, it might be briefly said in connection with the distinction between magicians that the magician of the good law works with the soul of things. His brothers of darkness work with the material aspect.
Yeah.
So when you work with the material aspect, matter doesn't have displayed the greater plan, the greater picture. It's there to be informed by something greater. That's why the white magician works with the devas
Mm-hmm.
to help imprint and give the, if you like, orders
Mm-hmm.
to the elementals.
Yeah.
By obeying orders, it simply means you are part of the great spelling.
Yeah.
Which is what creation is, the great spelling.
Right.
So when you talk about casting spells, the whole act of creation is a spelling because it's the word of God made flesh.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what are you making flesh? Self-centeredness?
Mm.
Unconditional love.
Yeah.
That's the distinction.
Yeah.
Like, oh man. So the next section actually allows us to reflect on what's happening today and also maybe cast our minds back several thousands of years to a former continent of ours, Atlantis.
Yeah.
So it says, the dark brothers are, remember this always, brothers erring and misguided, yet still sons of the one God, though straying far, very far, into the land of distances. The way back for them will be long, but the mercy of evolution inevitably forces them back along the path of return in cycles far ahead. Anyone who overexalts the concrete mind and permits it continuously to shut out the higher is in danger of straying on the left-hand path. Doesn't mean you're a bad person, but if you're not open-hearted and compassionate and loving, and your mind just takes over, then your mind is going to program you how to get what you believe you need, which is usually a pattern calling the shots.
Yeah, I find that really interesting because I'm listening to the telepathy tapes right now,
Right.
and this perfectly sums up the struggle that these people are having. For those who haven't heard them or heard of them, it's about autistic kids who are nonverbal, and they're discovering that they demonstrably have telepathy, and they are just running into the sort of scientific gatekeepers who cannot wrap their heads, or they just cannot let. It's like a none shall pass, And so this is kind of exactly what's happening right here. And like, you get the feeling like you don't want to look at these gatekeepers as the enemy. You just realize they'll get there eventually. They'll come around eventually. you know?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So let's just carry on with this because it
Yeah.
brings us into, well, if you look around the world now, I believe we're in a struggle
Yeah.
inside of
I
each
think so.
person, each community, each nation.
I've heard about this
You've
thing.
heard about it.
There's some things going on
There's
out there.
stuff going on the
Yeah.
planet, Joey.
Yes, apparently.
Maybe connected with this.
Could be.
So
Could
it
be.
says the dark brother recognizes no unity with his species, only seeing in them people to be exploited for the furtherance of his own ends.
Mm.
Ooh, no, we've called this narcissism. We've called this a lot of different things, antisocial behavior. But it's basically where I don't care about anyone else except myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that lack of empathy, the
Yeah.
lack of yeah.
Then it says, this then, on a small scale, is the mark of those who are being used by them, wittingly or unwittingly.
Mm.
They respect no person. They regard all men as fair prey. They use everyone to get their own way enforced, and by fair means or foul, they seek to break down all opposition, and for the personal self acquire that which they desire.
Yeah. I haven't seen anything like that happen.
Well, nobody's going to stand in the way of my agenda
Mm-hmm.
being played out. To continue, the dark brother considers not what suffering he may cause. He cares not what agony of mind he brings upon an opponent. He persists in his intention and desists not from the hurt of any man, woman, or child, provided that in the process his own ends are furthered. Expect absolutely no mercy from those opposing the brotherhood of light.
Mm.
And then just round this one out, and then we'll just see how it relates to what's happening. On the physical plane and on the emotional plane, the dark brother has more power than the brother of light. Not more power per se, but more apparent power, because the white brothers choose not to exert their power on those planes, as do the dark brothers. They could exert their authority, but they choose to refrain, working with the powers of evolution and not of involution.
Yeah, I found that part very interesting.
Well, see, so what happens is it looks as though darkness is spreading over the land and the light is lost forever.
Yeah.
On the material level, on the physical and the emotional level, as DK says, it appears that these forces of darkness have more power.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, when we work on deeper levels, they can't access those levels.
Right.
They don't have the gate code.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the gate code can only be gained when you open your heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then you're sent the code.
It's like the perfect antivirus software or the perfect padlocker. Yeah, you literally cannot open it until you open your heart, and then once you open your heart, and then.
But what you can do once you're in, and if humanity is focused in its emotional plane
Mm-hmm.
and tied up with the allure of matter, and this goes back to the first initiation that we mentioned many times, is we're facing collectively this first initiation where we have to see that we don't just live by bread alone, that we are not nourished simply by materialism. We have to draw upon a higher substance and sustenance. Therefore, what we're experiencing now is this battle between that which seeks to serve the good of the whole and the selfish tendencies that would hold us back. And the selfish tendencies appear to have more power for the time being.
Yeah.
Because the battlefield is being played out in the realms of economy, politics, and time, space, and substance.
Right. And that's the sort of that's the wheelhouse of the dark side,
But the soul cannot be vanquished.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they choose not to. Well, no, we're not going to react to that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's non-reaction.
Yeah.
Which is wisely saying, but if I reacted and intervened, I get into a karmic entanglement
I almost see it like a mindful parent watching a kid throw a temper tantrum and just not reacting and being like, okay, you're going to do your thing.
It's my understanding of what it means in the Bible to turn the other cheek.
Yeah, okay.
It doesn't mean to be weak.
Right.
It just means that, no, this too shall pass.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean you stand by and let bad things happen to good people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We've mentioned this before. Agni Yoga says it, and the Tibetan says it. If you see somebody abusing anyone, any being, or harming or killing, you are directed by life to intervene in whatever way is the most effective.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you suddenly become the sort of the sole police, but you're called as life to represent life.
Yeah.
When somebody is doing something that is against life. So let's look at this now from the perspective of what we see in the world, but I want to go back 11,000 years to the destruction of Atlantis,
Okay.
which we've covered a couple of times in recent episodes, because we said in Atlantis, what caused the if you like, the destruction was a small, powerful group of people who manipulated the elemental forces. And that's a sign of darkness. Who misuse their psychic abilities, who sought to focus power in one small place and not throughout the whole system. And because they were dealing with probably more advanced technology, my understanding from what I've read about Atlantis and other books, particularly from the Theosophical Society, is that at one point, because we know that life has both a creative and a destructive aspect to it. So the life ray would have a life-giving ray and a death ray.
Yeah.
It's said, now I've got no way of backing this up, no way of fact-checking, it's said that some of the scientists who were more of on the dark side had actually isolated the death ray. Which meant everything that came in touch was disintegrated. Not only the form, but the life inside it was. It's like when you play snakes and ladders or whatever you call it.
Shoots and ladders.
Shoots and ladders.
Yeah.
You go back down.
Yeah.
So you got to go back down to
the start.
To the start.
Yeah.
Now, because they worked and manipulated the forces of nature, nature rebelled, i.e., there was a normal reaction because it had been misused. And therefore, there was a convulsion of the elements.
Yeah.
And that convulsion caused incredible earthquakes, so strong that it ripped apart a continent.
Yeah.
And in the Rosicrucian documents that I've been privy to seeing, it talks about the destruction of Atlantis, where Atlantis sort of very rapidly sort of fell a mile to the seabed kind of thing, or just went downhill quickly. And it said, and this is what always blew my mind, and the sun stood still in the sky for 4 hours.
Oh.
I mean, it's like, that's how effective that shock was.
Yeah.
It just stopped everything. Now, I'm telling this not to sort of glorify the destruction, but just to say, when we work with the forces of life, if we are not cooperating with them for the benefit of the whole system, if we're using them to manipulate and to expand the power of the part over the many, in the end, we will cause the destruction of the form that we call society or civilization.
Yeah.
Because that's not the destiny. That's not the promise of that civilization. It got hijacked. If you look around the world now, without pointing fingers, some of the power's been hijacked.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now you look inside yourself and ask yourself the same question. What's been hijacked inside of me?
Yeah. Yeah. And nobody wants to admit that, but
by patterns.
Yeah, but once you start to do a real thorough self-check, and if you're honest with yourself, it's like, ooh.
So we're not here on this podcast blaming outside forces. We're saying however we align in our own lives calls in either the forces of involution or evolution. And as we know, that we're working for the full flowering of the spirit of the earth, or the destiny of Gaia, therefore, we are on the evolutionary side. Therefore, we're working with the forces of light or the law of good, as it says.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, anytime if I want to do something to aggrandize myself, I can kid myself, well, it's just for me. I'm going to just take what I need. But by doing that, you open the door to forces that want to take over the planet.
Yeah.
Or you
Yeah.
open the door where evil dwells.
That's right.
Well, I mean, this is heavy stuff. So what we're facing at the moment, we've been told by the Tibetan, is a replay of what we faced in Atlantis, because what we faced in Atlantis, we failed to learn from. And just because you fail to learn and the classroom gets destroyed doesn't mean the lessons go away.
Mm-hmm.
We are standing in front of the same lessons. So the same lessons is, how do we stand as the white magician rather than the black magician? If you're going to bring it down to a basic question, the choice is, who do you serve?
Yeah.
It goes back to Star Wars.
It is interesting how so much of literature and especially classical literature, how much it follows these archetypes. I mean, obviously think of Lord of the Rings, I mean, like it's, yeah. I mean, you think of like this Gandalf, the sheer number on the sheer numbers on the other sides, and how on this material plane, how powerful they were,
But then and when he goes into, I mean, I don't want to quote because not everyone may have seen the movies or read the books.
Spoilers.
But basically,
it's okay.
Gandalf, went through a death, and crossing the bridge under the mountains,
Mm-hmm.
and he did battle with this Balrog, and he succeeded in, overcoming the Balrog. And as it was falling down, it lashed out its tail, and its tail caught his ankle and pulled him down in the abyss with him.
Yeah.
That was Gandalf the Grey.
Right.
Now, when he reemerged later, because he'd gone through the fires, he went into a certain situation, and they went, "Oh, Gandalf the Grey, what can you do?" And he basically threw off his cloak, and I am now Gandalf the White.
Yeah.
Basically, hey, I am a representative
Mm-hmm.
of these solar forces.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it wasn't a battle between two people. It wasn't. This is not some sort of slugging it out between the champions of two nations.
Mm-hmm.
This is not mixed martial arts.
Right.
This is saying, I have aligned my life with the greatest possible force that is available, which is the force of the sun.
Yeah.
That gives life to all things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm here to dispel the darkness of ignorance and hatred and division. So it isn't we're killing the darkness.
Yeah.
We remove it by bringing light. As they say, it only takes one candle to dispel the darkness.
Yeah, it's not. I like the way you said it, because I think you don't want to view it as some sort of eradication or of like pest control. It's more that you're embracing it and like kind of giving it a hug and giving it love.
But what you are eradicating is those patterns inside of you and I,
right,
that allow it entry.
Yeah.
Sealing the door, closing the
That's
door,
right.
Not closing the door, and because if we don't want it to come in,
Mm-hmm.
but closing the door so there's nothing inside of us that would call it in.
Right.
So we're not inside, because if I close the door and don't do any inner work, I'm keeping, things from the outside from getting into me, but those things that attract the outside are still inside of me. So this is where we go back to, you've got to do the inner work of cleansing and purification. If you want to be a white magician, you got to be squeaky clean on all levels.
Yeah.
You can still have fun doing this.
Yeah, absolutely.
but there's no room for shadow aspects. It's, you've got to clean up your act, Joey.
Yeah.
I mean, and humanity is in the process of understanding the consequences of playing too much in the sandbox of matter.
Absolutely. I think we're communally having that realization, and you can see it almost in real time. And we are, as we, sort of move towards, I guess, this collective first initiation.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, we're barely scratching the surface, so maybe this is going to be a two-parter.
Well, let's see, because he
Okay.
gives us 4 hints.
Okay.
And I mean, we're not rushing this. We're seeing how long it takes because, yeah. So this is what he says.
Okay.
And now what methods may be employed to safeguard the worker in the field of the world? What can be done to ensure his safety in the present strife and in the greater strife of the coming centuries? And then he gives 4 points. Number 1, a realization that purity of all the vehicles is the prime essential. If a dark brother gains control over any man, it but shows that the man has in his life some weak spot. The door whereby entrance is effective must be opened by the man himself. So let me repeat that, because it's what we just said. The door whereby entrance is effective must be opened by the man himself. The opening whereby malignant force can be poured in must be caused by the occupant of the vehicles. Therefore, the need of scrupulous cleanliness of the physical body, of clean, steady emotion permitted in the emotional body, and of purity of thought in the mental body. When this is so, coordination will be present in the lower vehicles, and the indwelling thinker himself permits no entrance.
Yeah.
Cleanliness is next to godliness.
Yeah. Yeah, on every level.
Yeah.
It's not just the physical level. It's the spiritual, mental, emotional.
So this is number 2. The elimination of all fear. The forces of evolution vibrate more rapidly than those of involution, and in this fact lies a recognizable security.
Yeah.
Fear causes weakness. Weakness causes a disintegration. The weak spot breaks and a gap appears, and through that gap, evil force may enter. The factor of entrance is the fear of the man himself, who opens thus the door.
Yeah.
And this is what the Tibetan says in other of his writings, that one of the biggest blocks to humanity being inspired and being creative and co-creative as a species is fear. It puts a wet blanket over everything.
Yeah.
And that wet blanket puts out the fire of creativity, the fire of hope, the fire of courage.
Reminds me of the litany against fear from Dune.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
So, number 3, a standing firm and unmoved no matter what occurs. Your feet may be bathed in the mud of earth, but your head may be bathed in the sunshine of the higher regions. Recognition of the filth of earth involves not contamination.
That's an interesting one. Like, so you might have to walk through the mud, but you keep holding your head high.
Well, and it's said, well, why do some people go through plagues and not contract the disease?
Yeah.
It's usually said, I remember my mother said that mothers and nurses don't get sick because they're primarily focused on helping other people. Therefore, it can't enter them because they're in a positive transmitting mode.
Mm-hmm.
And what I see here is that you have to walk through the unredeemed matter, which would be the filth, the contamination of the earth, because it's been poisoned by our thoughts.
Yeah.
It's been poisoned by the chemicals that are the discharge of our emotions. Mm-hmm. So we've got incredible chemical pollution of the emotional body, the astral body. But we are not affected by it because it can't get into us because there's no opening.
Yeah.
But we can wash our feet because they're muddy. But the mud doesn't penetrate, doesn't pass through the permeable membrane of our being and contaminate us. We don't get sick. And then number 4, these are sort of safeguards to be employed. A recognition, I love this one, a recognition of the use of common sense and the application of this common sense to the matter in hand. Sleep much, and in sleeping, learn to render the body positive. Keep busy on the emotional plane and achieve the inner calm. Do naught to overtire the body physical, and play whenever possible. In hours of relaxation comes the adjustment that obviates later tension.
Yeah. How about that? Self-care.
Well,
What a
and,
novel idea.
and this goes back to, I think I told the story that I was privileged to know Roberto Assagioli when I was in my early 20s, and he helped me through a very difficult passage in my life. And I went into him for a counseling session, and I was expecting him to give me sort of magic formulas and lots of prayers and affirmations. And basically said, Michael, you've got to be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself. If you have an urge to go buy an ice cream, do it, but make sure you enjoy it.
Mm.
And by the way, don't read Alice Bailey at night before you go to bed.
That's not bad. That's
It's like,
fabulous
and
advice.
I was going, what? Is that it?
Yeah.
But he was basically saying, before we can begin the work, you've got to do healing. You're out of balance.
Mm.
You're out of balance. So he was helping bring me back into balance. I just come out of some years of addictive behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And I was repairing myself
Yeah.
and preparing myself to step onto the path consciously.
Yeah.
But I wasn't in good enough shape.
Mm.
He helped me to reshape myself. But it's reminiscent of what he's saying here, and play.
Yeah.
Because play is just the delight of the soul in being itself spontaneously inside the time-space coordinates
Mm-hmm.
with other souls who are incarnated. I
Yeah.
mean, and the Elysian fields from the Greek mythology,
Mhm.
it was called it's the place of happy souls.
Yeah.
It's the field of happy souls. So when we talk about bringing the Elysian fields down on earth and creating heaven on earth, it is playful.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't pious.
Right.
It's
right.
playful. But in that playfulness, what you're playing with, it's light-filled playfulness.
Mm-hmm.
So the white magician plays, but plays with light. The dark magician plays with the power of matter.
Yeah.
And there's not much fun in that in the end,
Yeah.
except if you want power, absolute power. But absolute power corrupts.
Mm. Absolutely.
Um,
Mm.
There was one other
There's one last section.
section here which we probably should read. Oh, God. The cultivation of emotional tranquility is one of the first steps towards the achievement of the needed equipment of the white magician. Because you and I know that when you're emotionally out of balance, when you get triggered, you're not centered.
Yeah. This is a huge one from this
Well,
really brings it home.
Because if you're not centered, you can't wield the power
Mm-hmm.
in a centered and altruistic way.
I also like the particular use of the word cultivation.
Yes.
Because that implies many things, that it's ongoing, it's seasonal. It's like, you're going to have your ups and downs, you're going to have your cold winters, but you are invested in this process.
Yeah, your intent is to grow this.
Mm-hmm.
So cultivation is an intent to grow something over time.
Right.
And then he ends with this sentence. This tranquility is not to be achieved by an effort of the will, which succeeds in strangling all astral vibratory activity, but by the cultivation of response to the ego with a capital E, the higher self, and negation of all response to the inherent vibration of the astral sheath itself. What he's basically saying is, turn to the light, turn to the light.
Kind of, yeah. It's, again, simple.
Go with the force, Luke.
Yeah. Trust yourself, yeah. Use the force.
And if I get introverted and start feeling pity for myself and I start to doubt, I turn back to a dark center, an unillumined center. And that unillumined center inadvertently puts me on the left-hand path.
Right.
But there is a time when a soul or a personality, if you like, a being may choose, I'm going to consciously travel this. And when you consecrate yourself to one of the other paths, that's when you take sides.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that, in a nutshell, is an encapsulation of what the Master DK has to say about magic, black and white, or white and black. And I go back to what we started with in the beginning. If we take out the word magic and magician and say co-creative agent of life on earth, carrying out the destiny and dream of the one life in time, space, and substance, it has more of a creative and playful ring to it than the old images of magicians doing battle with each other, hurling lightning at each other and all of that. Although it does have that power, because as we saw in Atlantis, you don't destroy a continent just by saying bad things about another person.
Yeah.
A continent is destroyed when you manipulate and cause an irrevocable imbalance in the forces of nature.
Yeah.
We are at that point now, at a tipping point, where the power of the soul, which is really the power of love, and through the agency of the heart, unless the heart is opened, we can't pass the first initiation. This was the key we mentioned last time. The first initiation is exactly this: how we make sure that we don't stray onto the left-hand path and the forces of materialism. And the key to passing the first initiation collectively for humanity is when the heart is open and the presence of a greater love is born inside the cave of the heart. Until that presence of a greater love enters our heart, we are not fully allied with the forces of evolution. We are not really the so-called white magician. So it's for each of us making a big yes and a consecration to serving evolution, which doesn't mean that other people are bad. It just means we're going with the divine flow.
Absolutely.
Do you have any closing thoughts, Joey?
Yeah. I mean, for me, this is a kind of a culmination, or it's like any long journey. Like you finish one journey, you realize you've just started another one. So it's a reframing of this idea, and it's also a reaffirmation of just an observations that I see in the world in my own work. Because I've been on both paths at different times in my life, and I have friends and colleagues who operate at very high levels on both sides of this paradigm, but the one thing I think that in my relationship with them and to myself is just, I realize I've always been coming at it from a place of love, and without even knowing it, without it having words for it, it's nice to kind of see that this is where this is about. It's.
Well, what you just said is key, because love casteth out all fear.
Yeah.
And it's that which ensures that we don't stray.
Mm.
And by stray, I mean not honor the call of our own indwelling life, our own sovereign self.
Mm. Yeah. And particularly that part about, like, how you have to open the door to let those elements in. And it's I can tell you from firsthand experience, like they nothing from that side could touch me until I let it in on my own. And then now it's the process.
And when you do let it in, it floods in.
It sure does.
And it can actually knock you right down onto the ground. It's the personal equivalent of the destruction of Atlantis.
Yeah, absolutely. I can attest firsthand to that. And then you begin the process of picking yourself off the literal bottom, the absolute floor, like, the darkness before there was light. And then you have to start building from scratch. Yeah.
And your rebuilding is motivated and called forth by the light of your soul.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, you're rebuilding the instrument of self that can honor the beauty, the truth, the goodness of the soul.
Yeah.
You're not rebuilding another, whatever.
Tower of Babel or something.
Exactly. Tower of Babel or Frankenstein's monster.
Mm-hmm. No.
And I think that's what we're looking at now. And when we're here at Meditation Mount, when we talk about building the new civilization and creating it, it's not just through creative meditation and meditating on the spiritual architecture, or what does it look like in the future? Because you can come up with drawings, but the drawings aren't the reality until they're lived.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we use the principles and pathways. How do you live into them, make them real? And when they're alive, they have substance. And that substance is the substance of the soul. Therefore, we're working with a matter of devas and angels. So our creative meditation here actually is magic work, working in cooperation with the higher forces, and then precipitating it and formulating it and bringing it into reality and seeding these things. So in that way, we are playing out what it means to be a white magician, but in new ways, and ways that sort of strip away all the baggage around what went before, but still carrying forward the essence of we're here to allow love to show up on earth in time, space, and substance.
Yeah.
That's it. It's there in black and white.
Yeah, there it is. Thank you, Michael. That was beautiful and incredible encapsulation. So, all right.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Joey.
Yeah. Thank you. We'll see you next time.